Hello and welcome back to the podcast. I'm very excited to have you here. And also excited that over the next couple of months, we're going to have a series of episodes that are, let's say, flavoured by my experience last year of being diagnosed with ADHD, which led me on a bit of a journey. And so while these episodes, well, some will be explicitly ADHD related, but not all of them. So there is still something in there for everyone. And so you might be sitting there thinking, awesome, I need to learn more about ADHD. Or you might be sitting there thinking, nah, that's not something we have to deal with. I might add, I used to think that too. But the reality is, whether we're gifted, we're ADHD, or we have autism in the mix, all of these neurodivergent states of being can have executive function challenges. And today's episode is all about executive function. So no matter where you are in terms of your neurospiciness, which is our new word of the day, there is something in this for you. And executive function, of course, as you will learn in this episode with Dr. Marnie Cumner, also develops over time. So it could just be an age thing. Dr. Marnie Cumner tells us all about that and how executive function works in today's episode. She's a clinical neuropsychologist. So neuropsychologists specialise in understanding how brain function affects our everyday thinking and behaviour. She's also specialises in paediatric neuropsychology, and she has been a guest on the podcast before. And if you want to check out Marnie's previous episode, it was number 42, How Can a Neuropsychologist Help My Gifted Child? Which is an awesome episode and everything you need to know about neuropsychology and the different approach they have to assessment. It's really fascinating. And Dr. Marnie comes from a very strength-based approach when she works with her clients. So it was amazing to dive into executive function today. She breaks it down for us and tells us exactly what it's all about. But we also go through a whole bunch of examples, and I happily volunteer some of the executive function challenges we have in this household for those real-life examples, and we talk through different strategies about those today. So I hope you enjoy the episode. Dr. Marnie Cumner's a wonderful guest, generously sharing her knowledge, and it was awesome to have her back on the podcast. And if you love the podcast, feel free to support us by leaving us a review or a Google review. You can become a podcast patron or share it with friends and get the word out there. So let's get into it then. Let's dive into executive function. See you again soon. Hi, I'm Sophia Elliott. As a parent of 3 gifted kids, I'm here to talk about all things gifted. Because I've been isolated and uncertain, and I felt like that parent, then I found peace of mind, support, and my community. This podcast is about sharing that journey, actually parenting gifted kids, and connecting with advice and support. So we have everything we need for every member of our family to thrive. This is the Our Gifted Kid podcast. Welcome back, Marnie. I'm very excited to have you back in a second episode. Last time you joined us, you were telling us all about what a neuropsychologist does, which is really great. And as I said at the time, I hadn't even realized such a being existed. So I think, and I know from the feedback I've gotten from parents that it was really helpful to have that awareness, because it feels like that could really speed up that journey of discovery for families potentially. And so thank you. And thank you for joining us again.
Yes, it's lovely to be back.
And today we're going to talk about executive functioning.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, though, just briefly for those who didn't catch the first episode, but who are now obviously going to go back and listen to it, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Okay, so I am a clinical neuropsychologist, which means I studied psychology and then I did some additional training, some doctorate training to specialise in neuropsychology. And neuropsychologists are all about sort of the brain and its impact on behaviour and cognition and emotions. I work in the paediatric field, which means I see a lot of children with neurodevelopmental differences or who have maybe had a brain injury. Anything that affects the brain and therefore affects behaviour is my field. And I have a little private practice in Noosa Heads, which I've had for about 10 or 11 years now. And I see children, teenagers, and the odd early 20s.
Fabulous. And so in talking about giftedness and twice exceptionality, this is right up your alley.
Yes, definitely, definitely. I see lots of twice exceptional kids. They're some of my favourite people. So love chatting about them.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So let's dive in then. What is executive functioning? Because it comes up a lot within the
Yeah.
whole neurodiversity gifted 2E kind of community. So first of all, what is it? What are we actually talking about?
Yeah. So executive functioning is, that term relates to sort of the set of skills, thinking skills that are responsible for things like planning, organisation, getting started on things, finishing things, regulating your own attention, regulating your own behaviours and emotions. So it's the overarching skills that sort of help to organise us and organise our thinking.
So there's a lot in that. It's very much
Mm.
like organizing, planning, so how we kind of manage ourselves in the world, but then also that emotional regulation.
Yeah.
So it's all, and how we manage our emotions in the world.
Mhm.
That's huge.
It is.
Uh,
It's a massive area, and I think it's a nice umbrella term, but it actually involves an enormous amount of different skills and abilities. And I think probably if you were kind of, in my mind, when I'm breaking it down into a nutshell, I'm thinking about self-regulation of your own attention, of your own
mhm,
emotions, and your own
mhm.
behavior. So that's
Yeah.
sort of the self-regulation part of it is really key.
And as you were like explaining it there, so and we haven't caught up in a while, but only recently I actually got diagnosed with ADHD.
Ah, congratulations.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, I know,
awesome.
right? It's
That's
kind of like,
wonderful.
yeah. So my diagnosis was, and I've lost the word. What's the one where you've got both? Combined type.
Ah, the combined type, yeah.
Combined type. So
Yeah.
both hyperactive and inattentive.
Mhm.
And so, which first of all, like totally flipped me out because I was kind of like, what? Everyone's not like this. This is
Mhm.
this is different. But it's been very interesting to understand what little cluster of lived experience challenges
Mhm.
goes into that little ADHD box. And as you were talking about executive functioning there, I was kind of like, yep, tick, tick, tick,
For
because what everyone can't see is my desk and the very creative mountain of carnage that is, my executive functioning challenges in those areas. Uh, so am I right in that giftedness, ADHD, and even autism are known for having big challenges individually, and obviously if you've got more than one of those things collectively in folk?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's one of the sort of core areas of challenge for people with ADHD and autism is exactly what you say. It's the executive functioning. It's that self-regulation of your attention and your behavior and your emotions that can form sort of a key part of the challenges and a key part of the areas that need support and scaffolding.
And am I also right in thinking that some of the challenges to seeing those deficits is potentially that giftedness component that can help mask?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. So I think that when it comes to the gifted crowd, it's often that there is almost like people with high sort of intelligence almost have like what I think of as a buffer, like a cognitive buffer that allows them to manage the demands, those executive functioning demands, reasonably well and perhaps very well, often to a point. And I feel like with bright kids, that point is sometimes they coast through primary school, it's fine. There's a lot of executive functioning kind of supports in place just implicitly in primary schools. Sometimes it's not until high school, upper secondary. Sometimes I see young people, it's not until they go to uni where there's not much executive functioning support at all, that there's that tipping point at which the the demands of the executive functioning outweigh their capacity in that area. And so it really is quite individual at which point
Mm.
in a gifted child's life that little tipping point is reached.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I've certainly heard that in different stories from people. And I think what my unfolding story is, so for anyone listening who isn't aware, last year I was diagnosed as gifted and autistic and kind of at the same time. And then this year I am now combined type ADHD. And so for me, I think I held it together until I had kids. And I'm like 10 years in. My eldest is 10 now. I have 3 kids. And it's been, uh, it didn't happen straight away, but increasingly difficult for my wheels, and but have eventually fallen off. And it's only been the last few years that I've actually realized that I'm not organized. Like, I always thought I was. And even like, uh, I used to be a campaign manager. I used to be a project manager. Like, my job was literally organizing and managing things. But I, with hindsight now, just see that I just worked really, really hard at it. And
Mhm.
I had that capacity because I didn't have kids to put a lot of time and energy into those areas. So that kind of leads me on to, so there's 2 components here, and I think maybe we will break them down. That kind of organizing our life versus organizing our emotions. So how does that organizing our life side of executive functioning impact our day-to-day living? What does that tend to look like?
Mm. So what I see in probably like the primary school age group tends to be things like, executive functioning challenges show up in daily life in the areas of having difficulty getting started on a task by themselves, maybe having difficulty finishing a task, of being able to get ready for school in the mornings without constant prompting from parents. So, holding that to-do list mentally in
Mhm,
mind is often, I always ask parents about how getting ready for school in the morning is going, to get a kind of bit of a litmus test on executive
mhm,
functioning. Just things like remembering to take your lunchbox and hand your homework in, and all those sorts of things are very much in the primary school age group, what I see. And then in the secondary, as because executive function demands increase hugely in secondary school, so then we have to start doing assignments and working to a deadline and studying for exams. And so it's sort of about that time management, planning, being organized, knowing how much time is needed to get something done rather than leaving it to the last minute. So it changes subtly over the course of childhood and adolescence. But when I think of it as sort of the attention regulation side of things, that is what stands out. When it comes to more like things like behavior regulation, it's often the difficulties might show up in, the impulsive kind of behavior. So with kids, I talk about difficulty putting the brakes on, or that their brakes work intermittently. And sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. Emotion regulation is about managing your frustration or disappointments. Often I see a lot of kids who go from seemingly calm to hugely distressed in a really short space of time, that that's still developing that ability to regulate their emotions rather than just volcanoing out.
So listening to that as a parent, especially one with an ADHD, with all these, letters and diagnoses myself, and
Neurospicy, Sophia.
what's that word?
Neurospicy. A lovely mum shared that with me the other day and I loved it. She said,
Neurospicy.
our family is neurospicy.
freaking love that.
I know.
Neurospicy.
I know,
Yeah,
it's great.
definitely. Yeah. No. Yes, definitely. Very neurospicy. I love that. That's great. I'll adopt that.
Love what you're learning from the Our Gifted Kids podcast? Why not become a supporter? The quickest way to do this is to leave a review. There's no need for an essay, 5 stars will do. You can also say thanks with a one-off tip in the tip jar or become a regular supporter for as little as the price of a coffee per month. There are lots of different ways you can say thanks. Check out the link in the show notes or head to www.ourgiftedkids.com to find out how you can help.
And so naturally now I'm looking at my kids going, do we have like, has anyone else, inherited this? Thanks, Mom. And it's kind of like, and so you're talking there. So, every parent, they're getting ready for school thing. Uh, and so for me, the question is how much of that is age and how much of that might be something else. And it's, trying not to over pathologize my kids. But the reality is, if I've got this diagnosis, there's a reasonable chance 1 out of the 3 may well have it.
Yeah.
And being a very firm believer in understanding that when we have these diagnoses, that gives us it's incredibly empowering to know that of yourself. And that is a gift that I want to give my kids early in life rather than late in life like I've gotten it.
Yeah.
So getting ready for school, for example, I've got one child, total disaster, and literally still kind of like, right, come on, would you like, let's get dressed. Would you like help with that? Yes, but that being said, they're not yet 6.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
so, but is also very hyperactive. But then I have another child who's older and, famously got in the car with dad to go to school. Driving down the road, I walk back in the house and all their shoes are still inside. And I raced up to the car and I'm like, what is on your feet? And he's like, oh, yeah, just socks. And it's kind of like, well, how much of that is this kind of absent-minded giftedness? Just so it can be challenging to untangle
Absolutely.
those things, I'm
Yeah.
imagining,
Yeah.
to kind of know where the lines are blurred.
Yeah. And your example is a good illustration of something else that's important about executive functioning is of brain development, of those sort of different areas of thinking. It is the last area to fully mature. So your executive functioning is sort of generally housed in your frontal lobes, your prefrontal cortex, which is the last area of the brain to mature, to myelinate. So, we've got, research tells us that brains don't finish maturing until they're mid to late 20s. So the expectations of your 5-year-old versus the expectations of a tween or a teen is actually significantly different because of their stage of neurodevelopment.
Absolutely. And I remember having this conversation once with a friend who was quite concerned about what she perceived as executive functioning challenges within her child and getting quite worried about it. But I was kind of looking at it and thinking, well, they're 7. And it's
Yeah.
kind of like, I'm not saying those challenges don't exist, but can we just breathe and give that child a bit more time to
Yeah.
get on top of that? So what you
That's right.
say is within that brain development, actually, there is a certain amount of grace
Yeah.
because the brain is still developing, and
Absolutely. Absolutely.
maybe consider what our expectations are.
Yeah. And that said, we do know that kids with ADHD and autism, so their neurodevelopmental differences, we know that they are very likely to experience more difficulty in that area than a neurotypical child. So we sort of balance it with the age expectations, but also the knowledge that they're going to need some extra help or they're going to benefit from some extra help
Yeah.
in those areas. The beautiful thing is that brains mature in response to their environments. So if we are putting in place certain strategies, which we can talk about, scaffolding these little brains that need that extra bit of prompting and reminding. Over time, that actually strengthens their own ability to do
Mhm.
those things. So it might be that you're repeatedly reminding your 5-year-old to put their socks on, but by the time they're 10, they'll, pop out and have their socks on already. And that's sort of, that's both natural neurodevelopment, but perhaps also your encouragement and your scaffolding around providing that sort of extra bit of help to make sure those tasks get done.
So the approach there for parents is, again, I guess, one of balance, and it's kind of good to acknowledge where your child is having some challenges in terms of executive functioning, perhaps temper and calm the expectations given their age, given their complex brain development anyway. So don't worry, but just provide some scaffolding
Yeah.
and perhaps lay off a bit in terms of expectations. If
Yeah.
they're not doing what one might be expected, just chill out a bit, try not to get wound up about it, but just offer those supports to help them,
Yeah.
like you say, build those pathways and gain those skills.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's important to remember that these little brains are ever growing and ever maturing, and there's so much neuroplasticity that we're working with that, you know, it it can seem like, executive functions sound so, I don't know, serious and
Yeah.
scientific, but the way that we support them is actually really quite organic for a lot of parents, so I see a lot of parents and they're already doing great executive functioning scaffolding, but they don't realize they are. So they sort of
Mhm.
like tell me, well, we've got the weekly, the week to the days of the week calendar on the fridge, and I've got written, sport on Monday, library book Wednesday, or we've got a to-do list for the getting ready routine in the morning, and the child goes and ticks each one off as they go. And I say to them, that is actually like executive functioning gold dust for that age group. They are really, it might not seem like amazing, serious sciencey stuff, but it actually is really making a significant difference because that is lovely scaffolding for that age group. You're helping them to learn those skills explicitly, such that over time it becomes just part of their cognitive repertoire.
Awesome. So there's a lot of simple things we can do that are going to make a big difference.
Yes.
So, any other ideas or strategies there that might be good for parents? And maybe let's break that down again into that kind of organizing versus
Mm.
emotional regulation. So one of the things we do for the morning, because we've got 3 kids getting ready for school, and we have a list stuck on the door. We actually have that for bedtime routine, because and and ironically, we don't tick it off, but it was a really good process to go through to create it. I think
Yeah.
was kind of made everyone aware of the things, and then yeah. So, well, I'm trying to think, what other things do we do? I don't know, what other things other than, checking that they have their shoes on when they leave the house.
Yeah.
What might be good tools or strategies for that kind of the organizing side of executive functioning?
Yeah. I think the idea really is child can become quite overwhelmed. So we think of like working memory, your ability to
Mhm.
hold things in mind and act on them.
Yeah.
So children and young people's a bit capacity to hold information online and think about it. It's smaller than when they're an adult. It's still growing. Think of it as like rather than the regular sized post-it note, it's like a mini post-it note. So it can hold like one or two pieces of information. So part of supporting the challenges, say, with regulating thinking skills and attention is to take as much load off that post-it note so that it's not
Mm.
totally overloaded. And that is, and that can take the forms of the things we're talking about,
Mhm.
checklists, calendars, things stuck on the fridge, reminders, all that kind of stuff. The important part, I think, when we talk about scaffolding is that the idea behind scaffolding is that you give just enough support for a child to be able to do the skill as necessary. Don't give them too much. You give them just enough that they can achieve that skill. And then once they can do it with that amount of support and scaffolding, you just take one small piece of the scaffolding away. And then you make sure they can still do it with this much support. And you don't take the support away until you're sure they can do that next step independently. And that's a really nice kind of, what we would call like errorless learning or positive reinforcement kind of loop, where we're not setting them up to fail by giving them say go clean your room and nothing. That's
Yeah.
that's a huge task.
Oh,
But
yeah. Yeah.
we're scaffolding it. We're saying, all right, so I would love you to clean your room. What shall we start with? What sorts of things shall we pick up first? And breaking that down into chunks for them, because that's a very large task in itself. And then just slowly, and I'm talking, over months to years, we just slowly reduce that amount of scaffolding as the child matures and is able to take on those skills by themselves. And that's fine. That's normal. That's what that's how development goes.
Mhm. So that makes me think of the way that we put away laundry. So I've got currently a 5 turning 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 10-year-old. And they've got to put away their own laundry. But what that looks like is I I empty the laundry of my 10-year-old onto their bed, and they are able to put it away. And by putting it away, I mean kind of shoved in the cupboard, which quite frankly is how I put away laundry, so I can't complain about that. I love Marie Kondo inspiration, but the folding and stuff, we don't always get there. And that's okay because they can manage that process. My 8-year-old, we go together into the bedroom. I empty out the laundry and I help them sort it into piles, and then they put away the piles. My 5 going 6-year-old, we take the laundry and empty it on the bed. We sort it together, and then we put it away together.
Wow. That's a lovely example.
Yeah, right? And
Yeah.
because, like you say, go put away your laundry, there's a lot of steps in that. And so, yeah, as the eldest has gotten older, I'm doing less, but for my youngest, we're still doing a lot. And particularly because I think that child does struggle to stay on task, and so I kind of have managed those expectations. And again, when we do clean your bedroom, I have one child whose room is usually tidy and just full of books, and another child who is probably more like their mother, let's face it, very creative, and the room is kind of like an explosion. So I help that child, and we we usually stand there for a moment and just kind of go, "Oh my god." And I'm like, "Okay." And I talk through the process out loud, and I say, "Right, we're gonna start with the big things. Let's make your bed first,
Yep.
because that gets the doona off the floor. Let's find the big things, put them away. Let's now find all the clothes." And we work our way down, and I vocalize it as
Yep.
much for myself as for my child,
Yeah.
and we get through that, and I feel like I'm helping them learn that process.
Absolutely. So you're modeling how you would approach it. And again, that's something that kids really, really learn from when the people, they're important people in their lives model the stuff, and they say, right, well, I would start with the big things and that kind of thing. They're learning from us all the time. And so
Yeah.
actually articulating your thought processes behind how you clean the room is really valuable as well. And I often will say to parents, like, it doesn't just have to be the good times that you can make a learning opportunity. And it's not possible to do it every time. But if, say, you're running around the house looking for car keys, you
Mm.
can actually either in that moment, if you're not too stressed, or later say, remember when I couldn't find my car keys? Oh my gosh, I was so stressed out. What I could do next time is, take a deep breath, think about where I might have put those. When did I last use the car? And you just narrate your thought processes.
Mm-hmm.
And children they really learn from that stuff. And so the good and the bad, the ugly, they're just
Mm-hmm.
learning from us that, sometimes things go well, sometimes they don't. And that's fine. This is how we manage those things, because they learn how to manage, their emotion regulation and their behaviour regulation from us as well. So similarly, when things go well and when they don't go well, we can still, talk about that to help them.
Absolutely. And talking of emotional regulation, something we learnt a few years ago now through, a few sessions with a psychologist, with the family, is that zones of regulation. And I think it's the green zone where it's like comfortable, positive, uh, the orange zone where things are kind of less comfortable. I don't feel like I'm doing this justice. Perhaps you can help. And then there's like a red zone. But the one thing we're probably quite good at as a family, and in those moments where I have lost something, or for me, it's usually, right, kids, we've got 5 minutes to get out the house. I'm struggling with this. I need your cooperation, because if we're not out in 5 minutes, we're going to be late. I'm really feeling like I'm in the orange zone because I'm starting to panic that we're not going to get out the house. And so it would really help me if you could X, Y, Z, because I need to do 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
And I do that whenever I start getting a bit, in those moments, as we all do as parents. I've gotten into a pretty good practice of doing that, talking it through out loud, because it helps me not to do what comes next, which is inevitably flipping out and going, right, I need
Yeah.
everyone in the car, and just, going to those places that we don't want to go as a parent. So there are different tools we can also use in that emotional regulation, executive functioning
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
area as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, part of helping nurture kids' emotional regulation is having the vocabulary to talk about emotions. So, when you model it and say, I'm really frustrated or feeling a bit panicky, those sorts of, really good emotion words, and that's helping the children learn an emotional vocabulary, because that's often how we do sort of self-regulate in that area, is to put words to the experience, rather than this sort of scary dark blob that we can't quite identify. So actually, I feel really unsettled, or whatever it might be. So parents modeling that kind of emotional experience, all emotions, is really valuable.
And I find the kids really responsive to that as well. And I wonder that, I mean, my kids are often busy. They're busy little people. And so they may not have noticed that mum's trying to get them out of the house and
Yeah.
not feeling well, or whatever it is. And so I think it really helps when I just kind of very literally share that. And then they're like, oh, that's where we're at. All right. Yeah. Okay. Better stop doing this and,
Yeah.
pay attention and help. And,
Yeah, that's
um,
right.
which kind of comes back to me to like what we were saying earlier about that ability to organize and follow tasks and do things. One of the concepts I came across quite a long time ago, and I think it was actually with that kind of Montessori philosophy, is very much about breaking down a task into its steps.
Yeah.
And we had this really great, like, pre-kindy, and we used to go there for a few hours with the kids, and the teacher there was quite exceptional, and she'd break it down. It really made me appreciate at the time that when we say, go put away your clothes, go tidy your room, go do this, go do that, it's kind of like, well, what does that actually look like?
Mm-hmm.
What are those steps? And it helped me to kind of talk through that stuff with my kids and be quite specific about it. And I think by extension, we can apply that to our emotional states as well. Like you were saying, just taking the opportunity to model and
Mm-hmm. And it is always about, and you hear this a lot when, we talk about executive functioning support and so forth, is about taking big tasks and breaking them down into a series of smaller tasks. It's much more manageable. It's more manageable for us as adults, so let alone for children. And that is sometimes a skill that actually we need to sort of teach children. It's sort of not all kids just get how to do that. Over time they will, but it's really, it benefits them to say, look, this is the big task. That seems like a lot. What's the first step? What would be the first step we would do? And you can do it in a kind of collaborative way as well. What do you think the next step would be? How do we know when that one's finished? How do we know when we go to the next step? And sort of trying to chunk it down into simple, achievable steps is definitely much less overwhelming. And so then we don't have the emotional overwhelm that will fly in once our executive functions are under pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. And because what I have noticed personally over the last few years in particular is that sense of getting overwhelmed by all the stuff going on. And then, you're completely flooded and you're just kind of paralyzed into not knowing what to do next. What are the steps? And that can manifest in procrastination. So then it's like, oh, I'm just going to avoid it because it's too big and scary and it just feels too hard. I'm not sure if everyone can hear my dog having a good old scratch there, but okay, good. I've got a treat. You go. Hopefully you won't hear her chewing the tree. That way she doesn't bark at leaves and birds outside. Yeah, so what's made me aware of, I think probably some of the tools and strategies I had developed throughout life that had kind of kept me going, but what became very noticeable, as the rails start falling off for various reasons. And I think for me, combination of kids and obviously the last few years, COVID, and I know a lot of people there's quite the spate of people realizing various things through the whole kind of COVID experience is having that scaffolding for myself in place. And so I can appreciate now if I'm kind of saying to one of my kids or anyone else, oh, go do this thing, or we've got this goal to achieve. I have, for instance, I have a daily list. So I have lots of lists. I have way too many lists. I have not perfected the executive functioning, organizing space at all. But what is kind of working for me is I will have a kind of a big list. I'm a great big picture thinker. But I also have I'm great at details, but what can feel very overwhelming is, and I think I just had the energy to work through it previously, is so I have to have the big list. I have to break that down into little lists. And eventually I get the things I have to do today and the things I have to do this week. And I have to make myself sit at my desk until the thing is done. But it's quite painful. It's quite painful to go, no, I'm doing this one thing first. I'm not going to get distracted. I'm not going to go shiny object over there. I'm going to stay focused and do the thing. And if it's quite painful for me at the ripe old age of mid-40s, I can only imagine as a child actually how challenging that is to sit and do the thing. I mean, if it's a thing I'm really interested in, I want to do, cool. But most
Totally
things
fine.
aren't, right? That's not everything in life. There are things we just have to. And so that kind of level of discomfort and pain is only something I've kind of recently come to terms with and realized as the source of my procrastination and everything else. So, so that provides for me, I guess, quite an insight and I guess comes back to that, just tempering our expectations of our kids according to,
Yeah.
their complexity, their age, and
Yeah. And I think we have to remember that an important part of, talking and excuse me, and modeling and breaking tasks down is that our kids are in a receptive headspace for it. So if we think about the zones of regulation and someone's in orange veering up to red, they are not going to be able to listen to us calmly and logically breaking a task down for us. We just need to help them get through that distressing, overwhelming moments and then, come back to whatever it was later. But, when we're sort of in that overwhelm or even sort of stressed, anxious state, then, our lovely, logical, higher functioning parts of the brain actually basically go offline, and we're just working with the fight, flight, or freeze response that, kept us alive, evolutionarily speaking. We're just in action mode and not in rational mode. So I think sometimes as parents, we do want to be in there solving a problem and calming things down, perhaps a little earlier than it is feasible, where we just need to actually let our kids get through, be with them, whatever helps them to get through the overwhelm, and then circle back to the initial task or whatever when everyone's back in the green zone.
Yeah. So acknowledging that need to just hold back until everyone's calm and in the right headspace, literally,
Yeah.
and kind of temper our expectations of that moment when things
Yeah.
are a bit heated.
Yeah.
I know I'll often, times like that, some of my kids will like to have a bit of space to find that calm. Other ones, we will have a bounce break. They'll go jump on the trampoline for a bit.
Yeah.
And I find having those circuit breakers help. And then we can talk about things afterwards,
Yeah. That's right. That's
that
right.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that you do a lot of work in this area, and certainly a big part of your role is that kind of assessment and diagnosis. And so is there anything else that you would kind of advice you'd routinely give parents who are walking away with maybe an autism or an ADHD or even giftedness assessment in terms of that executive function space? Any other
Yeah.
tips there?
I think mostly the tips and strategies are about the scaffolding that needs to occur at home, but also equally at school. So there's sort of, strategies slightly different, but same vein where, we're taking as much load off a little working memory as we possibly can to avoid it becoming overwhelmed. We are sometimes, I think with, say, kids with an autism diagnosis, sometimes it can be things like they might not know, when a task is complete because, they've had to sort of infer what that would look like. So sometimes it can just be really simple things like, you know, it's great to show a child what an example of the end product, this is what we're going for, this kind of thing, rather than expecting them to kind of somehow infer what's meant to happen. So be quite, I think with autistic kids, can be important to be quite concrete and quite specific about the task steps, because we know that inferring meaning from something that someone says is another area that can be really difficult. So making it quite a concrete task. This is an example of a project someone did last year. This is the kind of thing we're going for. It just allows a really strong visual kind of cue.
Yeah.
And then that really just can be used, I think, with instructions, not giving kids too many instructions, keeping them short, simple, concrete, checking back in discreetly with some kids that are likely to have not listened in the first place. Just can be really, really valuable. There's just a whole raft of different little tweaks. And I think what we're really thinking about with executive functioning is that a lot of the onus falls on the environmental modifications and tweaks, as opposed to trying to kind of fix something that's, there's no need to fix executive functioning. We support it and we nurture it and we foster it in those growing brains. But we do a lot of that by tweaking the environment. That's really key.
Yeah, making those environmental accommodations. I mean, I know myself as an adult, and maybe this is as an autistic adult, but also I think gifted. And it's kind of like, if if I need to do something, I will often say, look, paint it done for me. What does that look like finished for you?
Yeah.
And that really helps me to visualize the end product, but also not go off on like this massive tangent of like, well, it's like, that's like opening Pandora's box to me.
Yeah.
Well, it could be this, it could be that, it could be, I could go down all sorts of rabbit holes. And so it helps me to have that direction of, oh, okay, that's what you want. Cool. No worries. I can do that.
That's
Even
right.
as a grown up, I really
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
And maybe if we're talking about those environmental accommodations, it's a good opportunity for parents to kind of go, right, where are our biggest pain points in life right now? Is it getting ready for school? Is it getting ready for bed, homework, whatever?
Yeah.
How can we quite literally sit down together and do a list, some scaffolding, a calendar?
Yeah.
And initially, like you said, it might be that we're using that side by side, but over time that skill grows.
Yeah.
And by making that a visual aid of some sort, you're taking it off that tiny little Post-it note. I really love that image of the tiny Post-it note versus the bigger one. And it really helps me kind of think, oh, like the kids, they got to empty the dishwasher, and maybe returning to sitting down with them and creating some kind of visual lists. So it's off their mini Post-it note onto literally something on the wall that we can talk through.
Yeah. And I
and
think
it's
the kids really love to literally get involved in that list.
Yeah.
And I like to decorate it, to come up with it themselves, because that helps with, they feel more accountable and more kind of part of the process when when they're involved in designing it and creating it.
Yeah, absolutely. Make it a bit of a holiday project or something on the weekend to do as a family. Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. I mean, as a parent, I have my, it's a good week if I actually have it written. I have a weekly whiteboard, and if I'm organized enough to actually write down what we're eating each day, like the week is so much easier.
Yeah, for sure. Something you said just before reminded me about sort of the gifted aspects of the executive functioning too, because I think that sometimes, I might see a child who is gifted but doesn't have any, neurodevelopmental diagnoses or differences, but still parents talk about, difficulties with getting ready for school in the morning and all that kind of thing. And I think that sometimes because our gifted kids are intellectually well beyond their years, we maybe just kind of expect that they'll be well beyond their years in all areas.
Yeah.
And so just because our 6-year-old might be functioning intellectually at a few years ahead, like a 10-year-old, that doesn't mean they're going to be functioning at a 10-year-old level emotionally or in their ability to, put the brakes on their behaviour. They're still a 6-year-old. In fact, if they're hungry and tired, they might be putting the brakes on their behaviour like a 4-year-old does. So there's that kind of asynchronous development, which I think sometimes I think that's a nice reminder as parents to just think, okay, just because they're bright doesn't mean all these other areas of neurodevelopment are streaks ahead as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I think if you think about emotional regulation, like let's just look at adults. Like we've all been in that place where we have not regulated and we've, expressed those big emotions. Like it's a really hard thing to do, let alone all the time and get it right. And yet there's this expectation of kids when we know as adults how hard it is. And it's sort of like, I've told this story before. I think it was when I'd had my second child and I'd had postnatal depression. And it was just a really, second kid, it's tough at the best of times. And I wasn't coping well. And I was kind of like, right, I wasn't proud of my behavior. I'm like, that's enough. And so I had this whiteboard, little blackboard in the kitchen, and I literally wrote on it days since mummy meltdown. And I put a 0, and then every time had behavior I was not proud of, I would wipe it and start it again.
Yeah.
And I did have to restart it a couple of times because it can be quite frustrating when small individuals are refusing to eat the thing you've lovingly made with them just because it's on a pink plate instead of a blue plate. Do you know, like,
Yeah.
it's tough. And I got to the point where I was like 6 days in for the second time or something, and I'm like, "I'm not starting that counter again because you don't like the color of the plate. I'm gonna just suck it up, regulate,
Mm,
and, and model this emotional regulation for my kids and do it for
mm,
myself." And, I've had various tools to manage my regulation. And when I narrate my zone of what it what is it? My zone of regulation, like
yeah,
mummy's in the orange zone. It's all a part of those tools of managing my own emotions because it's hard. And
it is
so
hard. Yep.
sometimes I feel like we come down really hard on our kids for not managing it. And it's like, whoa, hang on.
Yeah, I
Show me
know.
an adult who gets this right all the time.
That's right. And also when you think about the fact that we are, struggling to manage emotions sometimes with a fully mature and myelinated brain, and then the little ones,
Yeah,
they're growing and maturing. They're not even working with a fully online prefrontal cortex yet, so it's that much harder.
absolutely. Let alone the asynchronicity going on in our
Yeah,
gifted and
yeah,
2E kids. It's a big
yeah,
thing.
yeah. It's
Um,
massive. It's massive.
yeah, yeah, it really
Um,
is.
yeah. I think it's nice to remember though that I like your example because it's just there's no point at which it's too late to just go, actually, that was not fabulous behavior from me. In fact, it was not
Mm.
fabulous at all. I'm just gonna own that. And, even modeling how you were dealing with that. I'm sure your little one took something away from that, that that actually because all emotions are fine, really. That's
Yeah.
part of the human condition. So we don't want to give them the idea that there's something shameful in being sad or angry or upset sometimes, but just that actually those are emotions, they come and go. And you know, this is how we manage them in that moment or manage
Mhm.
them next time.
And I have also gotten into the habit of, even now when I am, exhibiting that behavior with my kids or in front of my kids, or I'm not regulating, I'll actually kind of, when I, get it together, I will say, sorry, I was not managing my emotions well.
Mhm.
I hope that, you know, there wasn't an impact on you, or, just kind of explain where I was at. If I need to apologize, I do,
Yes.
because for me, I guess it's taking that accountability and the recognition that, I'm responsible for the consequences of my actions, just as we
Yes.
try and teach our kids.
Yeah.
Um, but also that I'm human and it's okay, and we
Mhm.
can apologize and start again, and we keep trying to get it right.
Yeah. That's right.
And the kids, and again, they're always, I think that really makes a difference. They appreciate it, and I think it's okay, if not the right thing to do as an adult, to sometimes say sorry to our kids.
Oh, yes. I think so too. I think so too, because again, I mean, like, quite apart from the fact that it's the right thing to do in that situation,
Mm,
again, you're modeling the fact that you're modeling how to repair a situation. You're saying, all right, this didn't go well. And you can even distinguish. You can say, look, it's okay to feel angry, but I shouldn't have shouted at you. And I'm
mm,
sorry. That was
mhm.
next time, maybe I'll take a deep breath and take a walk
Yeah.
around the yard. But what you're saying is, yes, it's okay, but know how I behaved wasn't okay. And
Yeah.
again, that's that wonderful modeling where they're like, okay, they're learning about, navigating this tricky emotional world in those
Hmm.
instances.
Hmm. For sure. For sure. Because as much as we talk about our kids, we talk about parenting, we're at the heart of all of that as parents, aren't we? As adults. And
Well,
it can be confronting to own our own stuff and deal with that stuff. But uh, again, I think that shows our kids that we're just human and fallible, and
that's
they can
right.
be human and
That's
fallible
right.
as well. And
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Sometimes I say to my eldest daughter, I will say, look, you're the first kid I've ever had. Sometimes I get it wrong because I'm just not sure and I'm just learning. And, you let me know. And she does certainly let me know. But I think you also, it's a respectful way to treat another human, isn't it?
yeah, yeah.
And
And I think
they
for
learn
me,
that too.
yeah, right. And I think for me, when there is a difficult issue, Uh, and again, probably with my eldest, because they're the eldest, you start to go through those moments where they're kind of like, well, no, don't want to do that thing or whatever. And sometimes it can be a complicated kind of issue. I think it's really allowed me to sit down and say, well, look, this is where I'm coming from, and we may not get it right all the time, but
Mm,
here's my kind of reasons. Like,
yeah.
and normally for me, it's around safety
Yeah.
and that experience of not being good for them or a great thing. And far from, some people might look at that as why you're explaining yourself, or it's not about those kind of things. It's just kind of, I think for me, sharing that perspective and engaging them in that process as well. Just kind of, and it doesn't happen all the time, but when that needs to, that conversation opens up. And I'm hoping that when we get to more difficult teenage years, then we have this template for putting our stuff on the table. Where are
Yeah.
you coming from? Where am I coming from?
Yeah.
Let's figure this out together, because, you know, they become bigger people and with
That's
their
right.
own minds. And
That's right. And I think if it was the opposite and you were saying now, so well, why are you saying no to this? And you just said something like, because I said so from the parents, then
yeah,
I suspect that teenager is much less likely to come to you when things are tough or they need help with something than if you start off that model of communication from a young age. I think that's the foundation.
yeah, yeah. And I think as really insightful kids, my kids always responded really well, to my rationale and the reason behind it. And all right, mum is being reasonable. And even they'll be like, I don't want to do it, but I can't deny the reasonableness of it, kind of thing, which is
Yeah.
really funny. But I really love that quote. I don't know where I read it, but it was like, if you want your kids to talk to you about the big things later, you got to listen to the little things now.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And I often think of that, and I'm like, yeah. So I don't know, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
I'm not looking forward to teenage years. I'm not there
Sure.
yet. If you have a teenager, I'm sorry. Hey, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's
It's been a
okay.
delightful chat.
Yes. Thank you for having me.
And how can parents get in touch with you? So do you just do face-to-face consultation?
Mostly assessments are
Yeah,
always face to face.
face-to-face. Yeah.
Every now and then I will do sort of like a telehealth consult or something if someone just has a one-off kind of
Yeah.
thing they want to discuss or review. But the best way to get in touch is probably my website, which is sunshinecoastneuropsychology.com. Um, there's also a couple of, like, on the executive function topic, there's a couple of books that I think are really good if people want to look those up.
Yeah,
Do
yeah,
you know what those
definitely.
are?
Yeah, let us know what those are, and I will put all these links in the show notes so people can find them easily as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's two books that I like. One is called Executive Functioning in the Classroom by Christopher Kaufman. It's pitched at the classroom, but there's just so much in there that can be tweaked for home. And it really is just a big book full of a brainstorm of fabulous executive functioning ideas. And he breaks them down by kind of like domain, like task initiation, working memory. Like it's really nice. So I like that one. And the other one that's great is called Smart But Scattered by Peg Dawson and Richard Guar. Again, good examples, good strategies for parents. There's a website which I'll send you the link, Sophia, that Harvard University have like the Center for the Developing Child, something like that. And they've just got a whole website full of executive functioning kind of strategies and supports broken down into different age groups. So it's really nice. Like you can look, this is the age of my child, and open up that link. Lots of good ideas.
Oh, that sounds great. I really love those things, the age-based thing, because as much as they don't really relate to my kids, it gives me a sense of, you know, a baseline or just a context or a bit of comparison to kind of put into the equation.
Yeah,
they sound great. I might check those books out for myself.
Yeah, I'll send them to you.
Yeah, that sounds lovely. Thank you so much for joining us today. I've really appreciated getting into this. I think lots of helpful stuff in there for parents. And thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you, Sophia. Good to chat.
If you enjoyed this episode and it inspired you in some way, I'd love to hear about your biggest takeaway in the comments. For more episodes, you can subscribe. And to help others find our podcast, please leave a review. You can find show notes and more resources at ourgiftedkids.com. And connect with us on Facebook and Instagram. See you in the same place next week.